Our epistle reading this morning comes from the book of Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 5 and verses 8 through 14. I would invite you to listen to the word that might be spoken into your life today, wherever you find yourself in this reading from Ephesians. For once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Live as children of the light. For the fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. Try to find out what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what such people do secretly. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible. For everything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, "Sleeper, awake, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine upon you." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Live as children of the light. I'm glad we get some sunlight today for this sermon. It would be a harder sell on a gloomy day. The fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. All that is good and right and true. Not just my goodness and my rightness and my truth, but all that is good. That's a lot of stuff, isn't it? I mean, surely there's more truth than one church or one faith tradition could hold all by itself. Surely there are truths that my own creeds and confessions never got around to, never discovered, never named, or maybe a few that we had at one time and lost along the way. In the end, life's truths might be very simple, but surely they appear in forms that you and I don't know yet. And as for all that is good and right, we've seen good and right things in people very unlike ourselves, have we not? Generosity, respect, kindness. These are not the domain of the American suburbs. They're universal. The divine light shines through all that is good, all that is right, all that is true. Not just my goodness, my truth, my rightness. This is good news, for it means that light, clear, objective, glorious light, is not a solitary thing. It's not something I can have just to myself. As individuals, as cultures, as faith traditions, each of us possesses a piece of it, pieces of it, but not the whole thing. Light happens when we come together and share our insights and our perspectives. Isolation, now that's darkness. Dancing solely around the embers of our own fire, that is darkness. Light happens when we bring our lights together as children of the light. For these past 2 years in Lent, we've had a Wednesday evening potluck and a movie discussion time. We all watch the same movie at home. We're told what movie beforehand to watch. And then we come together to talk about the ethical and the spiritual themes in that movie. It's not a religious movie ever. It's a popular movie. And we call this event Lent Flicks. I thought that was brilliant. I wish I could say I came up with it. That was Deb Boisvert. But who says that Lent has to be a gloomy time of penitence for our sins? And yet, as I said, it's also a potluck. And in the spirit of penance, I have been punishing our small Wednesday evening crowds for their sins by inflicting on them the food of the 1970s. That's supposed to be funny. It's not really for their sins. This is what I do when my wife's not away. I say to my kids, I had to eat this as a child. You will eat this too. Maybe you remember the stuff I mean. Many of you are not old enough. The one-dish dinners, the casseroles, things that are either full of ground beef and green peppers, or else noodles and a bag of mixed frozen vegetables. Spanish rice, American goulash, which is nothing like the Hungarian kind. This week we get tuna noodle casserole, I think. You get the point. But that's not what I wanted to tell you about Lentflix. I just couldn't resist telling you that. I wanted to tell you about the most recent film that we watched. This past week, at the suggestion of Leo Good, we watched and discussed the movie Babette's Feast. Do you remember that movie? It came out the year I graduated from high school, 1987. Babette's Feast. It was very popular, especially with preachers, back in the early 90s. In Babette's Feast, you have two devoutly religious sisters who live together, I would say in late middle age, somewhere along the stark coasts of Denmark. And their father had been the religious leader of some small sect that he started. And his memory still looms large over this village. He was a very stern and dour man. And it's a village of fishers and farmers. Both sisters had been beautiful when they were young, and one of them, when she was young, she was a wonderful singer, and she got discovered by an opera singer from Paris. And he wanted to train her and take her back to Paris to sing in the opera houses. But she could not bear to leave her strict father and her faith, and so she chose to stay there in that village. He was in love with her, too. The other was courted by a decadent young military officer. But the longer he stayed there, it just got too weird for him. Their poverty, their piety, it was just too much. He had to flee. All the God talk, it was so strange. And so the sisters have each other. They live together into old age. And they kind of keep the withering remains of their father's little congregation together. They make soup out of stale bread and flat beer. Sounds good, doesn't it? And they deliver it daily to shut-ins. And those who can still gather around their table to sing and to pray. And there's an old black and white portrait of the dour old pastor, their father, that hangs above the table. And I got to tell you, he has got the most wonderful clerical neckwear. He's got one of those Shakespearean-looking ruffles that the Lutheran ministers still get to wear in Denmark. Don't worry, I won't. And his stern ghost still presides over their simple, sober lives. But they're happy enough. They're happy. They're living the life they chose, the life they know. There's a lot of squabbling and pettiness in the tiny congregation, old grudges, hard feelings from decades ago. But the sisters keep their father's little flock going, and it gives them all a sense of shelter against the cold and the gray Danish coast. One day, a refugee turns up at the sister's door, and she's fleeing political upheaval back in France, where her child and husband were murdered. Babette is her name, and she assures the sisters, "Just give me a place to stay, and I'll cook for you." And out of simple mercy, they take her in, and they teach her how to make bread soup and how to boil cabbages. And she patiently learns how to cook from them and for them without complaint. And after 14 years of this life, learning Danish and making friends and cooking for the sisters, Babette finally comes into some money so that she can move back to France. And it turns out that she had been a famous chef back in France all along. And here she was making bread soup. She asks to prepare a feast for the villagers as a way of saying thank you for their kindness over the years and their welcome. And supposedly also to celebrate the 100th birthday of the old deceased pastor, the one with the great neckwear. And she imports all manner of rich, elaborate, wonderful food from France, cheeses and wines and spices and meat. The sisters are horrified. It's so decadent, it's so excessive. They warn their parishioners that excess is a sin, and so they must not enjoy the meal too much. But they do. They do enjoy it too much. They've never tasted such bounty, such flavor. And once they get past the strangeness, they realize that this is good. It's okay to be happy. It's okay to feel joy. And they give in to the pleasure of it. And then what happens? They start to do something they've never done before. They start to laugh together. And they start to chat. And they start to apologize about things that happened many years ago. And they start to forgive long ago offenses. And they all leave maybe just slightly tipsy, but also very happy. The meal has served its purpose. It has healed the community. The meal was more than meal. It was what we would call a sacrament, where divisions are rendered meaningless, and all hostilities and hurts are dissolved in simple joy and mutual affection and acceptance. It is redemption for those who already consider themselves too redeemed to need more redemption. Well, there's much more to the film, much, much more. It's a very rich film. That is not even the Cliff Notes version. But it illustrates the points that we draw from Ephesians. The small congregation in the movie struggled to keep the embers of their faith alive, fanning those embers as they smoldered into smoke. And they acted as if they alone possessed the truth about life and faith and God and what was good and what was bad. Their long-dead pastor with the great neckwear had shown them the way. And they did. They got some things right. They were nice people. They took care of the elderly and the infirm. They took them bread soup. But it took an outsider to lead them back to the joy and to the sense of community that faith ought to be about. And truly, is this not what faith ought to be about? Is it not what our religions are supposed to be about? Joy, community, mutual acceptance, forgiveness, love? Indeed, what more could life itself be about than these? Live as children of the light, holding tightly to one's own candle against the darkness of the world. That is not the divine light for which we are all created. Light happens when we bring our candles together. The fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. All of it, even if it is not our own goodness and our own rightness and our own truths. You know, Ephesians is one of those letters written either by the Apostle Paul or one of his disciples to a fledgling church in a part of the world known today as Turkey. Back in those days, it was all just part of the Roman Empire. And being Christian in those times meant living in opposition to empire, to the greedy, oppressive ways of empire. Typically in the letters of Paul, you start off with a very long greeting, which is followed by some sort of theological thought on some topic or another. And those deep thoughts lead into kind of advice for living, ethical guidance, if you will. The problem is that in Ephesians, it starts off with really good advice about how to live your life. The ethical guidance is top-notch. And then it starts to get a little strange the more you read it. At the beginning, we're told that all people are members of each other. That's nice. I can keep that and put it in my pocket and try to remember it. All people are members of each other. That anger should not be allowed to rot away inside us. That is also good advice. It says we should not be content to have enough for ourselves. We should also share when we can. That's good advice too. Ephesians condemns gossip and pettiness and bickering, and it tells us to forgive. But then it goes on to say this: wives, be subject to your husbands. And you're like, whoa, what? You were doing so well, Apostle Paul. What's this? I guess it's okay if wives are subject to their husbands as long as husbands are subject to their wives too. And then it says, children, obey your parents, which is the ideal if you have good and wise parents, which all of you kids do, but some kids don't. And then it says, slaves, obey your masters. And there you lost me. What do you even do with that? That is very definitely bad advice. But the point is entirely this. Even the writers of the Bible lived in a certain time and place where they did not possess all truth. The writers of the Bible wrote from their time and place. Even they could not see the world with perfect clarity. Even they were weighted down by some of the prejudices and the assumptions of their age. It's not that they were bad people or wrong people as such. It's just that they were, like us, children of the light doing double duty as children of their times. And this is how a single sacred book might call for the death penalty on one page and the ethical treatment of animals on the next page. Which of these is God's law to us, God's word, for our times? Whichever one calls for mercy, whichever one calls for generosity of spirit. Mercy and generosity, always true, always true. Beauty and joy are always God's way. Paul could not see from where he was standing all the evils of the domination systems of his time. He didn't understand, perhaps, or just didn't want to address the deep evils of slavery. And indeed, the slavery practiced in the Roman Empire was not racially motivated, and so it might have been just a tad less evil than the kind we had here. But Paul and his followers had blind spots. We do too. I wonder what our blind spots are. What will history hold against us? You might know by now that nobody judges you quite like your children. I don't know what our blind spots are because I have them too. Paul and you and I, we need exposure to things that we don't already think, things we don't already believe to be true. We need new insights that we can only gain by welcoming the light that others bring to shed upon our lives and the world, other cultures, other faiths, other people. This is not to say that we blow out our own candle and go bask in somebody else's light. It's to say that our light is brighter when it is not burdened with the impossible task of lighting up this world all by itself. It takes more than one candle to light up the night. Let us live as children of the light. Anyone who calls for generosity and mercy is a light in this world. I think it is just true that we believe that if there's one God, there's got to be one truth. If there's one God, there's got to be one truth, and that all the different kinds of church and religion must think they have the one truth to the exclusion of all others. In other words, we all just really want everyone to think what we think and believe what we believe. It makes sense if there's one God that there would be one truth. But isn't that one God big enough to contain truths that you and I have never heard of, that you and I have never known? The mystery that we have named God, isn't that mystery vast and ancient and universal enough that hidden in its ageless depths are truths we have not even discovered? Truths too lofty for words, truths that are only discoverable by music, art, poetry, song. Any God you can figure out and then squeeze into a book this big? That's a pretty small God. 105 billion people have lived and walked this earth down through the ages. There are 8 billion of us now. Is it not possible that at one point down through the centuries of time, one of them, or maybe more, knew some of the answers to the questions that are bugging us, or knows them currently? We think we're so smart, but we still don't even know what Stonehenge is. None of us gets the truth all to ourselves. Light is not a solitary thing. It's a communal thing. We get little fragments that we're called to bring together and to share. It's never held by just one person, just one faith, just one nation, just one culture. Light is communal. In the early 1970s, the eccentric anthropologist Colin Turnbull wrote a scathing book called The Mountain People. And it was about the depravities of an ethnic group in Uganda called the Ik people. It is an unfortunate name, especially if you're writing a book criticizing them. The Ik people. Touchingly, he dedicated the book like this. It says in the dedication, "To the Ik people whom I learned not to hate." That's sweet, isn't it? In the book, he tells about what he believes to be the moral depravity of the Ik, how they allow the elderly to starve and how they lie and how they steal and how they mistreat children. Turnbull claimed that this was just who they were. It was the Ik people. Other anthropologists said this is hogwash. This says more about the writer than it says about the people he's writing about. The Ik, of course, said that it was all lies and he was not allowed back into their land. But many readers believed it because we would believe almost any depraved thing about people in Africa, at least in those times. And so it's so easy to assume the worst about people who are so unlike us, not white, not suburban, not members of some moderate religious group with stylish, self-proclaimed Buddhist tendencies. But when we dismiss others as unreliable sources of wisdom and inspiration and knowledge, then we darken our own lights, rendering our world that much the darker. So far, so good. I think probably most of us are on the same page. We know that there is a richness in learning from other faiths and other cultures. We know that we alone cannot possess all the knowledge that there is. True historic Protestants would probably never turn to evangelicals or Christian fundamentalists for religious wisdom, but most of us would look happily to the Dalai Lama or to Gandhi. We see the insufficiency of our own tribe's wisdom. But this is where we get stuck. As Americans, most of us do not see the insufficiency of our own personal wisdom. Most of us think that we can figure it out. Most of us think that we can find the way. We can make our own way. It's all up to us as individuals. I can handle it myself. I'm making my own way. I'm finding my own path. Or this one that we heard so much of. I did my own research. God and life and faith and belief and science. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. But communities of faith exist in part so that private individuals can bring their wisdom together and learn from each other. They can pool their insights for the good of others, for the collective good, the greater good of the world. Churches and synagogues are places to learn from our faith ancestors, from the record that they left us, and also from our neighbors who, like us, are trying to be faithful, good people. They're places where we share wisdom. Also, most of us could do a whole lot better at asking for help when we need it. But we think we've got it. I got this. I can handle it. I can do this. We don't want to ask for help. None of us has it all figured out, so why is there still so much shame around asking for help? Why do people still hesitate to say, you know, my therapist told me? I do know a few people who say that kind of thing, but most of us don't. Why are so few willing to say, you know, I learned in AA? We don't want anyone to know that we see therapists or go to AA because that would mean that we don't have life all figured out. And you are supposed to have it figured out by now. We think we're weak if we don't have it in us, but we don't have it in us. We need each other for this. Which is weaker, hiding and pretending that we don't have problems, or admitting the obvious and universal truth that we have problems, and we can't do it on our own? It takes courage and it takes strength to ask for help. Life, health, parenting, faith, all of these require shared wisdom. We need each other for this because so much depends on us, on our doing them well. And here's the thing about living in the light. When you let your light shine, it makes me feel like it's okay for me to let my light shine. When you shine it gives me permission to shine. And that's rare because we don't often get permission to do that. When you ask for help with your problems, it gives me the strength to ask for help with mine. When you love yourself, it makes me look around and think, hey, maybe I could do that too. When you pursue your joy, it frees me from the fear of pursuing my joy. When I see you being brave, it gives me courage. When I see you having hope, it gives me hope. Your belief helps my unbelief. Your love is a cure for my hate. Your light kindles the light in me. And the same formula works for darkness. Live as children of the light. The fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. Our world needs this today. We cannot live as if our tribe alone has everything we need in this world. And we certainly cannot live as if we, as individuals, have everything unto ourselves that we need. We need each other. We cannot create our own happiness without looking to and investing in the happiness of others. And so, though the whole truth of the universe is beyond all of us, let us at least trust in two things: generosity and mercy. Boldly, humbly, together, let us seek and share the light. Light doesn't happen all by itself. It has to be shared. We can be sure that all that is all that is good and all that is right and all that is true is the presence of God in our world. Amen.